Hi, my name is McKay. I am not a professional photographer. This is my Sony a6000 camera. It's pretty good, but it's not a professional camera. So I got this about 3 years ago, and when I got this, I got it with both kit lenses. So the Sony a6000 comes with these kit lenses. I think this is the most common one it comes with. This is a 16 to 50 millimeter zoom lens, and I think some of the a6000 cameras could come with this if you opted for that option. This is a little more expensive. This is the 55 to 210 millimeter zoom lens. So for the past 3 years that I've had my camera, I've used these two the most. Actually, I've been pretty happy with these lenses, but after about the first year of using these kit lenses, I thought maybe I want to actually get another lens. So I hopped on to Amazon to look at the prices for some lenses, and yeah, so spending more money on a lens than I spent buying the camera itself seemed kind of crazy to me at the time. So I held off for about 2 years before I bought any lenses. A year ago, I actually broke down and got some lenses, and I borrowed some lenses from my brother, and I've been using these lenses for the past year. So in this video, I want to kind of compare using just the kit lenses to this past year where I've used some prime lenses and some more expensive lenses. And in this video, I'm actually going to show a lot of sample images that I've taken, and I actually did a pretty comprehensive test, putting everything on a spreadsheet and marking things down, doing kind of some image comparison testing. So this is actually kind of a long video. If you just want to skip to my conclusion about the lenses, go ahead and skip to this part of the video, and I'll just talk about my overall thoughts. But keep watching if you want to see some actual concrete examples of what a difference some of these lenses can make. And one more thing to keep in mind, I am talking specifically about my camera, which is the Sony a6000, and the kit lenses that come with this. I know that some other cameras, for example, Canon's Nifty 50 is actually a pretty good kit lens, but for this video, I'm talking mostly about this guy. So to get started, let me show you this picture. This is a picture I took of my family a couple of years ago, and I used this kit lens for this picture. And while it's not necessarily a terrible photo, there's really nothing special about it. Nothing really pops or stands out, other than maybe the fact that I have really cute kids, and I still don't know how I was able to marry someone who's way better looking than me. So here's another photo I took a few months later. It's a similar composition, but I took this photo with my brother's $1,000 lens. And right off the bat, you can see that the colors are more vivid, background is blurrier, and the image overall is just a sharper and better looking image. So it was about a year ago that I took that image, and at this point I saw, yeah, lenses really do make a big difference. And I went ahead and I got my first lens that wasn't a kit lens, and the lens that I ended up getting was this 25 millimeter Micro Plus lens, and later on I eventually got another Micro Plus lens that's the 35 millimeter. So after I got this 25 millimeter prime lens, I ended up using it as my primary lens for probably 1 or 2 months because I liked using it so much. Compared to my Sony kit lens that had somewhat flat photos, this Micro Plus lens has a wide aperture of 1.8, and it lets in a lot more light to get more dynamic photos. And like I mentioned previously, I also ended up getting this Micro Plus 35 millimeter lens that has an aperture that can go a bit wider to 1.6. So the next lens that I ended up getting is this Viltrox 85 millimeter prime lens. And the best comparison I have with this is my 50 to 210 zoom kit lens. You can see that when I take a photo with my kit lens, it's not really letting in as much light as a lens with a wider aperture. So the result is that this photo has a bit more noise and is just not as sharp. Now this photo, on the other hand, I took with the Viltrox lens. It has much less noise and it looks much sharper because of the wider aperture. After I got all these prime lenses, it was really obvious to me that prime lenses make a big difference. I was getting better results than I was with my kit lenses. But I was kind of curious how much of a difference it actually makes, and if it was just kind of in my mind that I thought I was getting better pictures with this, or if I did an actual side-by-side comparison, if I could see some really specific results. And so here's what I did for this test. I woke up at 4:30 in the morning to make sure that there wasn't any outside light, and then I set up my own lighting so that I could control the lighting very specifically and do consistent lighting with the different lenses. The other thing I did was set my shutter speed to 250 so that the shutter speed was consistent throughout every single lens I used and at every single aperture I took the photo at. And I put the camera on a tripod and set the timer for 2 seconds just to make sure that some of my photos weren't getting blurry by me pushing the shutter key down and moving the camera just a little bit. So what I really wanted to find out in this test was how setting my aperture in the lens would affect the amount of light going into this. And the way I measured it was simply by setting my ISO function to be auto and seeing what the camera wanted to set the ISO at. If it had a really high number, then I would know that not a lot of light is getting through, so the camera needed to bump up the ISO. If it had an ISO of 100, then I would know that enough light is getting in for the camera to take a nice, good, clear shot. So I ran the test. I took about 90 photos. I swapped out every lens. I put it on all different aperture settings. I kept the focal point the same in every single photo, and I recorded myself comparing the photos for everything, and the video was over 20 minutes long. So rather than showing that, I'm just going to kind of summarize the key points I took away from this test. So obviously some of my prime lenses have a wider aperture than my kit lenses, so you can't really do an apples to apples comparison in that regard, because you're just going to get more light coming in with the wider aperture. But I did go intentionally and set the aperture to be exactly the same with my kit lens and my prime lenses, just to compare how much light was actually getting in and seeing if it was any different. In theory, the aperture is the same, so the amount of light that's going in should be the same, but as I suspected, there were many cases that I was getting a lower ISO number on the prime lenses, which would indicate that more light is actually getting in even though the aperture is the same. You can see on the spreadsheet I've highlighted all of the ISO numbers that were not consistent when the aperture was the same, and there were many instances where the ISO was lower on the prime lenses than on the kit lenses, which makes sense to me. There actually were 2 instances though where the kit or zoom lens actually performed a little bit better in that regard. Overall though, the prime lenses performed a little bit better, which is what I would expect. And then when I look at these images side by side to compare them, even when I was doing an apples to apples comparison, that is, I had the same exact settings, same aperture, shutter speed, focus point, everything, the prime lenses seem to be a bit more sharp, have a little more clarity, the colors seem to be more vivid and have better contrast. Now there actually were a few instances when I tested the narrower apertures that the kit lens performed very comparable to the prime lens, and there was even one instance where the kit lens performed better in my opinion than the prime lens did. This is also something worth noting. Sometimes a lens might do really well with a wide aperture and not so great with a narrow aperture, and vice versa for other lenses. So another interesting thing that I discovered was I compared this Sony 85mm with this Viltrox 85mm. So they're almost essentially the same lens per se. The Sony does cost about $100 more. It has a couple other features that the Viltrox does not have. But when I tested this with the widest aperture of 1.8, I actually felt that the Viltrox did quite a bit better. The Sony had some chromatic aberrations, and overall I just like the Viltrox more. When we went to a narrower aperture, however, I thought that the Sony actually performed a bit better than the Viltrox. So again, that's something worth noting, that lenses perform differently depending on how you set the aperture. So if you have a style where you like a narrow aperture as opposed to a style where you like a wider aperture, that's something you need to know and take into consideration before you get a lens. And finally, the last test I ran was doing video and filming a video comparison with the kit lens versus a Sigma prime lens side by side, and you can see in this, like, honestly, I can't tell for sure if one has better quality than the other. I can say for sure that with the Sigma prime lens, the background is just blurrier. That's what you would expect. It has a wider depth of field, and that's what I want for video. So that's obviously an advantage of a prime lens in that regard. So what are the biggest takeaways here? Basically, if your end goal is just to have the best image quality possible, having a lens that lets in more light, then you're just going to need to go beyond your kit lens, and you're just going to need to go out and get a lens with a wider aperture, either a prime lens or a more expensive zoom lens. And obviously the main advantage to a kit or zoom lens is simply that you can zoom, and that really is a very convenient thing and something to keep in mind. The main advantage of a prime lens is that usually they will have a wider aperture. In a lot of instances, I still have to use my zoom lens, especially if I need to zoom in to see things far away. So you just really need to know what style of photography you like the most and what type of picture you're going to be taking the most. So if you're an average photographer like me, what do I actually recommend you do as far as getting a lens? If you're still shooting most of your pictures in automatic mode and you don't necessarily feel really comfortable in some of the manual modes, I don't really recommend you go out and spend a lot of money on a lens. Is it going to make your photos instantly better or have better quality? Sure. But you're probably not going to be able to utilize the lens to its full advantage. What I do, however, recommend is that you get one of these lenses. These are really cheap lenses. This was $65, and what I liked the most about this lens was because it's a manual lens and not automatic focus, it forced me to be more familiar with my camera. And not only that, it forced me to think of photography in a different way. I had to be a lot more specific with how I wanted to take a picture, because I know it's going to take a lot more time to take a picture with this. I have to really think in my mind, how do I want to take this picture? And I have to be very intentional about everything I do. And if I'm being honest, I think getting this lens has helped me more with photography than just about anything else, because of what it's forced me to do with my photo. Now, if you are already comfortable using the manual modes on your camera and you only have the kit lens, realistically, your next step is just to go ahead, bite the bullet, get a better lens. Yeah, they can cost a lot of money, but they're really just the next step in getting better quality photos. Even getting another camera body isn't going to necessarily increase your photo quality that much. That being said, as I've shown before, with the Viltrox and the Sony, you don't necessarily have to get the most expensive name brand lens. You can find some really good lesser known brands that take really high quality photos. And my last recommendation is that before you go out and you get a lens, see if you have a friend or a relative who has a lens and ask if you can borrow it or go rent a lens. But really, you want to use a lens before you go out and buy it, because every lens is very unique and different, and it really depends on your style of shooting for what kind of lens you will need. Thanks for watching this video. I know it was really long, but I hope you found some value in it. If you have a lens that you use and you like, go ahead and post a comment below. Let everyone here know what lens you use and why you like it. Also, if you're interested in some of the lenses I use in this video, go ahead and check out the description below. I will have all of the lenses listed, and let me know if you want to have a look at the spreadsheet that I put together with some of that information. I'd be happy to share it with anyone who wants it. Cheers!